It was a bitter February morning in 2010 when the small town of Winter Falls, Massachusetts, woke up to shocking news. Maria Perez, a Venezuelan immigrant, was accused of murdering her brother-in-law, Gabriel Perez. What made this case even more gripping was the complicated story behind it, one that involved family drama, a forbidden relationship, and secrets that unraveled everything. Gabriel was more than just a victim. He was a local hero, someone the town admired. But behind the admiration was a tangled web of jealousy and betrayal. Maria's life, which started with hopes of building a future in the United States, had taken a tragic and unexpected turn. This wasn't just a crime. It was a story of people caught in situations they couldn't control, where personal struggles and emotions pushed boundaries. As the details emerged, it became clear that this was about more than just one act of violence. It was about the cracks in a family that couldn't hold itself together. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to start at the beginning: Maria's journey to Winter Falls and the challenges she faced as she tried to make a life in a new place. Maria Perez came to the United States in 2002, full of hope and dreams for a better life. She left Venezuela to start fresh with her husband, Luis Perez, whom she had met in her home country. Luis was reliable and kind, working hard as a mechanic to support their future. Together, they imagined building a simple but happy life. They settled in Winter Falls, Massachusetts, a quiet town where everyone seemed to know each other. But for Maria, fitting in wasn't easy. The town was mostly white, and she often felt like an outsider. Subtle looks and hushed whispers followed her as she walked the streets. Even Luis's family, while polite on the surface, seemed uneasy with her presence. Maria tried to ignore the tension and focused on supporting her husband. Luis worked long hours to provide for them, often taking double shifts at the garage. This left Maria alone for most of the day in a town where she already felt isolated. She hoped time would bridge the gap between her and her in-laws, but the distance only grew. Her loneliness was compounded by the high regard Luis's family had for his older brother, Gabriel. To them, Gabriel was everything. Luis wasn't a decorated military officer and a symbol of pride for their family. This unspoken comparison made Luis quieter, more withdrawn, and left Maria feeling the weight of unfulfilled expectations. Despite these struggles, Maria held on to the hope that her new life in Winter Falls would improve. But the challenges of being an immigrant, the undercurrent of prejudice, and the strain in her relationships set the stage for the events that would eventually change everything. Gabriel Perez was everything his family and the town admired. A military officer with an impressive career, he was seen as disciplined, honorable, and a man who represented tradition. For the residents of Winter Falls, Gabriel embodied the values they held dear: strength, loyalty, and family pride. Within the Perez family, Gabriel's achievements cast a long shadow. His parents admired him deeply, and his reputation set the standard for the family. This created an unspoken tension with his younger brother, Luis, who lived a quieter, more modest life. Gabriel was always the center of attention, the one who brought pride to the family name. To Maria, Gabriel was a distant but intriguing figure. At first, he seemed polite but reserved. He rarely spoke to her directly and often seemed to observe rather than engage. His presence at family gatherings was commanding, and Maria couldn't help but notice the way others gravitated toward him. Over time, Gabriel's role in Maria's life began to shift. He became a more regular presence in her world, stopping by with small gestures of kindness. For Maria, who was struggling with loneliness and a sense of not belonging, Gabriel seemed like someone who saw her differently. But beneath his composed exterior, Gabriel carried his own struggles. The admiration he received came with high expectations, and he bore the pressure of always being the family's ideal. His charm and confidence hid a deeper complexity, one that would soon become intertwined with Maria's life in ways no one could have imagined. As Luis spent more time working long hours to support his family, Maria's days grew lonelier. Gabriel began visiting more often, at first with small, thoughtful gestures: a bag of groceries, an offer to fix something around the house. To Maria, these visits felt like a break from the isolation she faced daily in Winter Falls. Their conversations started casually. Gabriel would tell stories about his military service, his travels, and his experiences. These moments provided Maria with a glimpse of a world beyond her own struggles, a temporary escape from feeling like an outsider. Gabriel listened in a way that made her feel seen, something she desperately craved in a place where she felt invisible. Over time, their connection deepened. Gabriel's confidence and charm began to fill the emotional void left by Luis's absence. He was attentive, noticing the small things about her that others overlooked. Maria started to feel that Gabriel understood the loneliness she faced, even if neither of them openly acknowledged it. By the time spring arrived, Gabriel's visits had become routine. He lingered longer, shared more personal stories, and his presence became a comforting constant in Maria's life. She found herself looking forward to his company, drawn to the way he made her feel like she mattered. But as their bond grew, so did the complications. What began as companionship started to blur into something more. Maria couldn't ignore the new feelings stirring within her, and Gabriel's attention became harder to dismiss. Neither of them spoke about what was happening, but the line between them was becoming harder to define, setting the stage for choices that would lead to devastating consequences. By the time winter returned, the relationship between Maria and Gabriel had crossed a line neither of them could ignore. What had started as innocent visits and conversations turned into secret glances and unspoken tension. Both of them were fully aware of what was happening, but neither had the strength to pull back. Maria felt torn. She loved her husband, Luis, but she couldn't deny the growing connection she had with Gabriel. For the first time since coming to Winter Falls, she felt truly seen and valued. Gabriel gave her something Luis couldn't, a sense of excitement, an escape from the heavy expectations of family and community. For Gabriel, the relationship was about more than just attraction. He had spent his life living up to others' ideals, carrying the weight of being the perfect son and role model. With Maria, he found a sense of rebellion, a break from the flawless image he had worked so hard to maintain. The affair began quietly, almost without a clear start. A touch that lingered too long, a moment of silence that said more than words ever could. Each secret meeting was a mix of guilt, passion, and the thrill of stepping outside their carefully constructed lives. But their growing closeness came at a cost. Maria wrestled with the shame of betraying Luis, and Gabriel's jealousy started to surface whenever Maria spoke about her husband. The relationship, built on secrecy and stolen moments, was becoming more intense and more dangerous. What they shared wasn't just love, it was a mix of resentment, longing, and the need to escape lives they no longer felt in control of. The path they had chosen would soon lead to consequences they could neither predict nor avoid. As the affair deepened, Gabriel's feelings for Maria shifted from passion to possession. He became more demanding of her time, finding excuses to visit her even when it wasn't convenient. His once casual demeanor was replaced by an intensity that Maria couldn't ignore. Gabriel started to act jealous, though he tried to mask it. If Maria mentioned Luis or seemed distant, Gabriel's mood would darken. He wanted more of her attention, more of her commitment, and he wasn't willing to share her even with her own husband. His gestures of kindness began to feel like tools to keep her tied to him rather than acts of care. Maria noticed the change but didn't know how to handle it. Gabriel had become unpredictable, one moment kind and attentive, the next distant or brooding. His visits became longer, his words more pointed. He started asking her to leave Luis, making promises about the life they could build together. At first, Maria tried to reason with him, but Gabriel didn't seem to listen. His admiration for her turned into an obsession, and she began to feel trapped. What had once been a relationship that gave her comfort and excitement now felt suffocating. Gabriel was no longer just a companion or lover. He was becoming a looming presence in her life. Maria started to see glimpses of a darker side to Gabriel, one that frightened her. She began to feel the weight of the situation she was in, but she wasn't sure how to escape. Gabriel's obsession was growing stronger, and she feared that walking away might lead to something even worse. The tension between them was building, and the cracks in their fragile relationship were becoming impossible to ignore. By the start of 2005, Gabriel's obsession had reached a dangerous peak. He became more erratic, showing up at Maria's home unannounced and refusing to leave until she gave him her attention. He no longer hid his jealousy, openly expressing anger whenever Maria mentioned Luis or tried to create distance between them. Gabriel's frustration turned into ultimatums. He began threatening to expose their affair if Maria didn't leave Luis. His words were sharp, his tone cold, and his intentions clear. He would do whatever it took to keep her in his life. Maria felt cornered, unable to see a way out of the tangled mess their relationship had become. On February 7, Gabriel arrived at Maria and Luis's home late in the evening. He brought a bottle of whiskey, but his mood was far from celebratory. His presence was unsettling, and Maria sensed that this visit was different. Gabriel wasn't there to talk or reminisce, he was there to confront her. The argument that followed was heated and filled with accusations. Gabriel's jealousy boiled over, and he demanded that Maria leave her husband to be with him. When Maria tried to reason with him, Gabriel's frustration turned physical. He cornered her, his words full of anger and desperation. In that moment, fear consumed Maria. Feeling trapped and threatened, she grabbed a kitchen knife in a panic, hoping to protect herself. Gabriel lunged at her, and in the chaos, a violent struggle broke out. Maria acted out of pure instinct, her strikes fueled by terror and the need to survive. When it was over, Gabriel lay lifeless on the floor, and Maria stood frozen in shock. The quiet house, once a symbol of her hopes and dreams, was now the scene of a tragedy. The line they had crossed together had led them both to this moment, and nothing would ever be the same. The morning after Gabriel's death, Winter Falls police were called to a scene that was anything but ordinary. Gabriel's body, lying in a pool of blood, immediately pointed to a crime of intense emotion. The local authorities quickly brought in Detective Sarah Miles, known for her ability to read between the lines in personal conflicts. From the start, Detective Miles knew this wasn't just a random act of violence. The number of stab wounds and the chaotic nature of the scene suggested deep personal ties. She noticed a shattered photo frame near Gabriel's body, showing Luis, Maria, and Gabriel together, a silent clue to the tension between them. Maria's behavior also caught the detective's attention. While Luis was overcome with grief and confusion, Maria appeared strangely calm, her expression distant and unreadable. She denied any involvement and described Gabriel as just a family member who visited occasionally, but her lack of emotion didn't match the gravity of the situation. As the investigation unfolded, the forensic team discovered encrypted emails on Gabriel's computer that revealed a dark and obsessive relationship. The messages were filled with Gabriel's possessive declarations of love, shifting over time from romantic to threatening. He wrote about his unwillingness to let Maria go and his readiness to expose their affair if she left him. Maria's replies told a different story. Initially hesitant but affectionate, her tone shifted as Gabriel's obsession grew. Her later messages were cautious, sometimes pleading, as she tried to create distance. It was clear that Maria had been trapped in a toxic cycle of fear and control. With these findings, the investigators began to piece together the reality of their relationship. The emails painted a picture of a woman overwhelmed by Gabriel's obsession, showing how the situation had spiraled out of control. For Detective Miles, the evidence wasn't just about solving a murder, it was about understanding the complex emotions that led to this tragic breaking point. As the pressure of the investigation mounted, Maria's carefully maintained composure began to crack. On February 18, after days of questioning and mounting evidence, Maria finally broke down and confessed to her affair with Gabriel. Her voice was shaky, but filled with the weight of someone who had been carrying an unbearable secret for far too long. Maria admitted that Gabriel's attention initially felt comforting. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't since moving to Winter Falls. But as their relationship deepened, it became something she could no longer control. She described Gabriel's increasingly unpredictable behavior, his sudden visits, his anger, and his threats. She spoke of her fear, recounting moments when Gabriel's obsession took a darker turn. She revealed that he once threatened her with a knife, telling her he would rather see her dead than let her leave him. Her words painted a picture of a woman caught in a situation that had spiraled far beyond her control. Maria explained how she had tried to distance herself, but Gabriel wouldn't let go. His possessiveness became suffocating, and she lived in constant fear of his next move. The night of Gabriel's death, Maria said, was the breaking point. His threats, his anger, and her overwhelming fear drove her to act in self-defense. Her confession wasn't filled with excuses. It was raw and emotional, a glimpse into the turmoil that had consumed her life. Maria's words added a chilling layer to the story, showing how the relationship between her and Gabriel had moved from passion to control, ultimately leading to a violent end. For the investigators, her confession was a turning point, offering critical insight into the tangled emotions that had led to that fatal night. But it also raised new questions about how much of Maria's actions were desperation and how much were premeditated. The news of Maria's confession sent shockwaves through Winter Falls. The town, which had once been a quiet and unassuming place, now found itself at the center of a scandal. Residents, already curious about Maria as an outsider, began forming opinions about her role in the tragic events. Luis, devastated and blindsided, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal and loss. He had always seen Gabriel as a trusted older brother and Maria as his partner in building a life together. Now his world had been turned upside down, leaving him grappling with feelings of anger, sadness, and confusion. Dolores, Gabriel and Luis's mother, was quick to voice her disapproval of Maria. She had never been entirely comfortable with Maria's presence in their family, and this event only confirmed her fears. To Dolores, Maria represented everything that had gone wrong, a foreigner who disrupted the family's harmony and ultimately brought them to ruin. Neighbors came forward with observations about Gabriel and Maria. Some spoke of seeing Gabriel's car parked outside Maria's home at odd hours, while others recalled their tense interactions at social gatherings. Their accounts painted a picture of a relationship that was far more complicated and intense than anyone had realized. As the story spread, the town became divided. Some sympathized with Maria, understanding the isolation she must have felt and the fear that likely drove her actions. Others sided with Dolores, viewing Maria as the source of the family's downfall. For many, the case became a reflection of broader tensions between tradition and change, between belonging and exclusion. The Perez family name, once associated with pride and respect, was now marred by scandal. For Luis, every interaction in town became a painful reminder of what had happened. The community's whispers followed him wherever he went, and the family's private grief was laid bare for everyone to see. Winter Falls was no longer the quiet, insulated place it once was. The tragedy had left a mark on the town that would not fade easily. When the case went to court, it quickly became the center of attention, both in Winter Falls and beyond. The prosecution built their argument around Maria's affair with Gabriel, portraying her as manipulative and calculating. They claimed she had taken advantage of Gabriel's feelings, using his affection for her own gain. To them, Gabriel's death was the result of a selfish act, not one of desperation or fear. The defense took a different approach. Maria's lawyer argued that she was a victim, trapped in a toxic relationship fueled by Gabriel's obsession. They highlighted the challenges Maria faced as an immigrant in a town where she was never fully accepted. Her isolation, combined with Gabriel's controlling behavior, created a situation she couldn't escape. The prosecution pointed to the violent nature of Gabriel's death and argued that Maria had acted out of anger, not self-defense. They painted her as a woman who, after her secret was threatened, chose to eliminate the problem rather than face the consequences. The emails between Maria and Gabriel were used to show the intensity of their relationship, with prosecutors emphasizing the darker tones in Maria's earlier responses. The defense countered with evidence of Gabriel's threats and erratic behavior. Witnesses described his aggressive demeanor in the weeks leading up to his death, including his confrontations with Maria. The defense portrayed Maria as a woman pushed to her limits, acting in fear rather than malice. Throughout the trial, emotions ran high. Each piece of evidence seemed to tip the scales in a different direction. The courtroom became a battleground of conflicting narratives. Was Maria a victim or a perpetrator? Was Gabriel a protector who was betrayed, or a man consumed by his own dangerous obsession? The case wasn't just about Maria and Gabriel. It became a reflection of deeper issues, like prejudice, family dynamics, and the consequences of unchecked emotions. The trial left no one untouched, especially the Perez family, who sat through each session as their private pain was dissected for the world to see. After weeks of emotional testimony and heated arguments in court, the jury finally delivered its verdict. Maria Perez was found guilty of manslaughter, a decision that acknowledged her role in Gabriel's death, but stopped short of labeling her actions as premeditated murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge announced her sentence, 20 years in prison. For Maria, the decision was both a relief and a heartbreak. She avoided the harsher charge of murder, but the sentence meant losing the life she had worked so hard to build. She stood motionless as the reality of her future sank in 20 years behind bars, away from her husband, her home, and the dreams she once had. Luis sat in the courtroom, shattered. He had lost everything: his wife, his brother, and the family he had hoped to keep together. The man who had once been his role model was gone, and the woman he had loved was being led away in handcuffs. The sentence wasn't just a punishment for Maria, it was a stark reminder of how much the Perez family had lost. Dolores, Gabriel's mother, watched the proceedings with a solemn expression. For her, the verdict felt like justice served. She had long distrusted Maria, and the trial had only deepened her resentment. To Dolores, the sentence was a way to restore some dignity to her family, though the pain of losing Gabriel would never fully heal. Outside the courthouse, the town of Winter Falls remained divided. Some residents felt the verdict was fair, while others believed Maria had been treated harshly. Her immigrant status and the affair with Gabriel continued to fuel debates about guilt, morality, and the societal pressures that had shaped the tragedy. The sentencing marked the end of a grueling trial, but for those involved, it was far from closure. Maria's imprisonment left Luis to pick up the pieces of his broken life, while Dolores clung to the belief that justice had been served. The Perez family was forever changed, and Winter Falls would never forget the scandal that had shaken its quiet streets. The verdict wasn't the end of the story. Was just the beginning of the public's fascination with the case. Media outlets descended on Winter Falls, eager to turn the tragedy into headlines. Reporters dug into every detail, turning Maria's life into a spectacle and casting her as the central figure in a tale of scandal and betrayal. Maria's immigrant background became a focal point for the media. Some outlets painted her as a mysterious outsider who had infiltrated a respectable family and caused chaos. Others sympathized with her, highlighting the prejudice she had faced in a town where she never fully belonged. The coverage was divisive, feeding into debates about culture, morality, and the pressures of fitting into a new society. In Winter Falls, the reactions were just as split. Many residents sided with Dolores, believing Maria was the source of the Perez family's destruction. They saw her as a manipulative figure who had taken advantage of Gabriel's affection. Others felt Maria had been unfairly targeted, pointing out the isolation she faced and the controlling behavior of Gabriel that led to her breaking point. Luis, meanwhile, became a reluctant part of the story. As journalists sought interviews and townspeople whispered behind his back, he struggled to maintain any sense of normalcy. Walking through Winter Falls, he could feel the weight of the community's judgment. Some pitied him, others blamed him for bringing Maria into their close-knit town. For Dolores, the media attention was both validating and exhausting. She saw it as an opportunity to defend Gabriel's honor and the family's reputation. But even as she stood firm in her belief that Maria was to blame, the constant spotlight reopened old wounds, making it impossible for her to grieve privately. The case, once a family tragedy, became a national story. It was no longer just about Maria, Gabriel, and Luis. It was a symbol of deeper societal issues, sparking discussions about race, immigration, and the devastating consequences of unspoken tensions. For Winter Falls, the media frenzy brought an unwelcome spotlight, turning their quiet town into a stage for a tragedy they wished they could forget. The trial may have ended, but the aftermath continued to haunt the Perez family. Luis returned to a life that was barely recognizable. His once quiet home was now a painful reminder of everything. He had lost his wife behind bars, his brother gone, and the love and respect of his mother fractured beyond repair. Dolores clung to her sense of justice, convinced that Maria's conviction was the only way to restore some semblance of honor to their family. But her grief for Gabriel ran deep, and her relationship with Luis became colder. In her eyes, Luis had failed to protect the family by bringing Maria into their lives. Conversations between them became strained, and the once strong bond between mother and son was now a source of tension. The Perez family name, once associated with pride and tradition, became a symbol of scandal in Winter Falls. The community, which had rallied around them during Gabriel's military service, now treated them with a mix of pity and judgment. Whispered conversations about the trial and the family's downfall followed Luis wherever he went. Despite the animosity, Luis chose to stay in Winter Falls, unable to abandon the town that had once felt like home. But his presence became a quiet struggle. Each day reminded him of the brother he had lost and the wife he had loved despite her betrayal. The weight of it all left him isolated, with little hope for rebuilding the life he once dreamed of. For Dolores, life continued in her own way. She held on to her belief that Gabriel's memory could be preserved, but the cost of that resolve was a growing distance from her surviving son. Her grief and bitterness shaped every interaction, creating an unspoken wall between her and Luis. The Perez family was left fractured, its members living separate lives filled with regret and sorrow. The tragedy that had unfolded didn't just destroy lives, it left wounds that time couldn't heal, ensuring that the Perez name would forever carry the shadow of what had happened. The story of Maria Perez and Gabriel Perez was more than just a tale of tragedy. It became a cautionary reminder of how unchecked emotions and societal pressures can destroy lives. At its core, the events in Winter Falls were not just about one affair or one crime. They revealed the deep cracks in relationships, community dynamics, and personal identity. Maria's journey highlighted the struggles of feeling like an outsider in a tightly knit community. As an immigrant, she faced subtle prejudice and isolation that chipped away at her sense of self. These experiences played a significant role in her decisions, leaving her vulnerable to the attention and acceptance she found in Gabriel. Gabriel's obsession revealed the destructive power of unaddressed emotional turmoil. He had spent his life living up to high expectations, suppressing his own struggles to maintain an image of perfection. When he found someone who seemed to understand him, his feelings spiraled into something he couldn't control. The Perez family's story also underscored the cost of unspoken tensions within families. The rivalry between Gabriel and Luis, the weight of parental expectations, and the silent judgments all created a fragile foundation that eventually crumbled under the weight of the affair. For Winter Falls, the case became a reflection of broader societal issues. It forced the community to confront its own biases and the consequences of isolating those who don't fit the mold. The scandal left a permanent mark on the town, serving as a reminder of the damage caused by prejudice and unspoken resentments. Ultimately, this story wasn't just about Maria and Gabriel. It was a warning of how easily relationships, families, and even communities can unravel when emotions and expectations are left unchecked. The events in Winter Falls served as a painful lesson in the cost of passion, jealousy, and the inability to escape the roles society imposes on us.